Well, hello, folks. As I record this, I wish you a very good, warm Wednesday morning. It is spring break week. I'm here in the office trying to get some things done. It's pretty cold outside, so I hope that you are enjoying your time with no assignments in my class, at least. I know that as a professional who's taken online MBA courses, spring break really doesn't mean much to you because life continues to march along, unlike that experience that our on-campus students have that actually get to go home or go to Florida or something like that. I appreciate what you're doing. I admire you for what you are accomplishing as you balance family life and work life and school life. It's an awful lot to take on. Just know that even when it seems like it's going to overwhelm you, if it seems like it's going to just completely drown out everything else that's important in your life, and you wonder why you do it, that you got people here on campus who are rooting for you, who are hoping that you'll succeed, who are trying to prepare you for bigger things. Hope that you are experiencing a class that is showing to be some benefit to you, that you can see where you might be able to use some things, and there's some practical applications. This video is not intended to be very long. I think that the instructions that I put out there are pretty well put together to tell you what I'm wanting, what I'm looking for and hoping for. So rather than really talk extensively through something that you can read, I'm just going to hit a few highlights and point you back towards the instructions. If you haven't looked at them yet, they are attached to the Dropbox for the management application, I think it's called, in the assignments section of the class. And also attached to it is a rubric. The rubric looks a little scary because there's a lot of things that I'm looking for. None of them really have a massive hit. The two biggest pieces in the rubric are actually the talking that you'll do about the interview that you have and how you apply this. That's 45 points out of 100. But I get ahead of myself a little bit here. I'll get into that in just a second. The purpose of this conceptual paper that you're going to write, practical application paper, is very simply to talk to somebody who does this and to see how these things really show up in the real world. What I want you to be able to do as you come out of this class is think about some of the things that management has tried to do over the last 200 years to find things that you think have some potential and build them into your management theory. Each one of us has our own individual customized management theory, and you believe that certain things will work according to your personality and your style and your situation, your environment. And some of those things will work very well for you, but they don't work for me. So our philosophies of management will be a little different, and there certainly will be some overlap of things that we all think are probably right. Probably we all would agree that it's important to listen to your people. It's important to know your people and to interact with your people. But we may disagree on how task-oriented we are and how goal-oriented we are, how much we might say micromanage our workers. So you'll develop some pieces of that are unique to you. And hopefully in the course of this class and reading all of these people and what they've done, because there's such a wide variety of people that we talk about in this class, that you're pulling little pieces here and there, and it may be one sentence from that chapter that really resonates with you. And this seems like it ought to work in management where I am, and I'm going to try to do that when I get to a position where I can actually manage and influence people. So this paper really is designed to get you to think back on what you've learned, what you've picked up on, and to talk with somebody who's in management, maybe somebody who is at a higher level of management. I'm going to leave that up to you. And say, these are some of the things that we're talking about. Is this real? Do you see this? Do you do this? So what I want you to do, if you're looking at the term paper instructions on page 1, think about somebody that would be willing to give you some of their time. And I'm thinking to make this thing work right, you might probably need to work with somebody for an hour or two and just talk. It's similar to what I do in my organizational leadership class, where I get you to interview a leader and find out about what that leader does and how that leader learned about leadership. This is a similar type of a thing. So if you had me for org leadership, this is going to sound a little bit familiar. If this is the first time that you've taken me, again, the objective here is to talk to somebody who's in a managerial role and connect these things that are in the book with real life. They sound pretty good on paper, but do they really work? If we don't do these things in real life, why not? It sounds so good on paper. What makes it not work, at least where you are in your perspective? And one thing that I hope happens in the course of this that would be interesting to you is you're talking to this manager, and what they're doing is describing something that Fayol talked about, and they have no idea maybe who Fayol is. They have no idea that somebody talked about this and wrote about this and studied this and measured this 150 years ago, 100 years ago. And as you're listening, the light bulbs are going off, and you're going, that sounds just like Taylor. That sounds just like Babbage. That sounds just like Emerson. All these kinds of things, because you know about these things. You've been enlightened about these things, and maybe occasionally in the course of the conversation, you say, you know what, that sounds just like something that a guy talked about 50 years ago, and you may never heard this guy, but let me share this thought with you. So as you're learning the real world side of this from a manager, maybe you're also educating the manager that we've tried this before. Somebody's done this and figured out a way to make it work. So find somebody, first of all, who you really respect in terms of a manager, who's accomplished something in your mind, who's a good manager. It may be somebody that you work for right now. It may be somebody you've worked for in the past, or somebody that you know. Maybe somebody who works for a for-profit or a not-for-profit. Maybe it's somebody who manages a volunteer organization, like the president of your local Rotary Club or something. As long as they're a good manager. Could be somebody that's a CEO or a department head. You might get more insight from somebody who's done it longer, who's experienced more management, who's risen in the ranks a little bit and is managing a variety of things. The idea maybe being not perhaps the manager of the accounting department, but more of the vice president of accounting that oversees various functions within accounting. It has to use different styles for different times. The higher you go in the organization, the more you have to widen your management philosophy to be able to impact everybody and to manage everybody. So find somebody that'll give you some of their time. And as I say in the introductory section here, basically it's initially, hey, I'm taking this MBA class about management, and we're supposed to, for a project, talk to somebody who's in a management role that we respect and talk about what management's all about. And I'm interested in spending some time with you if you can spare it. It might be an hour or two. We could do this after work. I could call you. I could stop by, for 15 minutes twice a week for the next couple of weeks to talk, just chit chat. It's nothing real formal, but hopefully you'll find somebody that says, I can see some potential in this, and I'd love to share with you some of what I've learned and maybe help you to develop into a better leader. And then you could use this actually a little bit selfishly if you're trying to put yourself in a position where you might be considered for a promotion into a management role, to interact with the person who's making that decision, to share with them what you're learning about management and how you can use what you're learning to be an effective manager. That may be one of those intangible things that they factor into their decision-making process when they're deciding who to promote. So you could use this to your advantage, certainly. Once you get somebody that is willing to work with you, before you actually start meeting with them, you need to start thinking about what you want to talk about. You might think about this like it's a newspaper interview or something, where you go in with some questions that you want to have addressed. And part of the interview is just talking. You tell me about management. At appropriate times, I'm going to ask you some questions, but I want you to kind of drive this thing. But think back over what you've read. As you've seen something in the book, in one of the chapters, that really is interesting to you, that you might have made a mental note about, jot it down on a piece of paper. If there are certain ideas from some of the people that we've read about, jot down their name and their ideas. Maybe you write down, Taylor and his First Class Man, or Fayol and what he called the 5 functions of management, or the 14 principles, or one of the principles, or whatever, authority and discipline, responsibility, things like that, esprit de corps. But make a list of those things that were interesting to you as you read. And then think about the theorist that you wrote about and some of the things that person contributed that you might find interesting to talk about. If you wrote about Mary Parker Follett and some of the ideas that she had about teamwork and we're all in this together, and I'm not necessarily giving orders simply because I've got a title. You might give orders because you're the expert on this particular circumstance. Talk to your manager about what he or she thinks about that. Is that pretty radical? So think about your theorist, think about what you've read about in the chapters, but also think about the little papers that you've written, the page and a half, 2-page papers, and the topics. There was something about that question that intrigued you. So see if you can kind of work that question into your interview and learn more about that particular question. And hopefully as we get towards the end of this, you begin to see how some of this stuff fits together that I've been getting you to do. All of those little assignments may seem pretty nitpicky or pretty trivial, time-consuming, got to fill in the blanks as we dot the dots and stuff, but they all hopefully are pieces of a bigger puzzle, and this particular application paper is the bigger puzzle, where you put all those pieces together and you form a picture out of it. Each one of those little assignments doesn't make much sense by itself, but when you add them all together and you put in the theorist paper and you put in all these chapters, now we begin to see a big picture that this puzzle creates. So think about those things. Make a list of the things that you want to talk about, and then start scheduling some time with this manager. Maybe it works best for y'all if you just sit down for an hour one day and you can get all this done in an hour if you're not interrupted. Maybe you want to spend half an hour 2 or 3 times, or 15 minutes half a dozen times. I'm figuring that you might want to figure an hour to an hour and a half of talking time will get you what you need to write this paper. After you've spent some time with your manager, you want to find out some stuff about that person's background. That's a big part of this paper. Not a whole lot of points, but it's important for me to understand why you picked this person. The first thing that you want to do is you write this paper. And again, I said I wasn't going to go through all of this, but I do want to give you some of the highlights. Start off with a quick introduction. This is why I'm writing this paper. It should really answer the question, why? Why did you do this? Why did you go through this exercise? And it's not just because I had to do this assignment, but I wanted to learn about how these things work in real life, or I wanted to see from a manager's perspective how some of these theories are part of everyday life, even if we don't know that they're theories. It may seem like common sense, and we didn't even know that somebody talked about this 100 years ago. So a very short paragraph that's an introduction. Then I want to know something about the company, and that's just a well-built paragraph that might be 6 or 8 sentences, I don't know, that tells me a little bit about what this organization is. That builds the framework that we're going to narrow into this person. The third major section is telling me about this person in the background, why this person's in management, how they got there, what role they fill, so forth. All of that, maybe 2 pages of your paper. 5 to 7 pages target overall, quick introduction, organizational overview, individual overview, and then you get into your interview and you start talking for 3 or 4 pages maybe about the things that we talked about. This could be first person if it needs to be. It almost has to be first person. I asked this, or maybe second, well, I guess third person. The manager said this, and that sounds like something that I read about. It's going to be allowed if you put some first person in here, I and me and my perspective and so forth. This is not your typical term paper where it has to be third party and very disengaged and on the outside looking in. You're in the middle of this as you write. Talk about the interview and what you talked about, what your manager said, what it sounds like from the chapters. In those places where your manager offered something without you asking, build in some quotes the best you can. Certainly ask some questions to direct that manager towards certain ideas and what that manager thinks about those ideas, and build that in as well. And then there's a short section toward the end where you step back and you think, what does all this mean? What have I learned? How can I apply this to my managerial growth to make me a better manager? So some personal application in this, and maybe a page, half a page, 3/4 of a page, something like that, kind of putting it all into reality and what do we do with it. And then there's a very short conclusion where you sum it all up. Basically what I learned from this is this, or what I can take from this. Here's the main thing that's going to help me in the future, and why doing this provided some sort of value. And hopefully all this happens in 5 to 7 pages. You might be able to do it in 5. If it's less than that, you're probably not going into enough detail on something. If it's more than 7, you may have spent a page talking about this person, and I didn't need that much information. I'm trying to give you some good frame of reference points, milestone points to know when it's time to quit writing on a particular thing. And then as references cited, you might not have any references other than something that you use to get the information about your company. That might be a website, it might be an annual report, it may be something that comes up in the course of the interview. Certainly you have a reference of the interview And I'm not real clear, even myself, on how you cite an interview. But the Purdue website, Purdue University, has got a great section on resourcing things and sourcing things in your paper. And there's a way to do an interview, personal interview. You're going to want to cite that in your paper and in your references. So you might have an annual report or a website or something about the organization. You might have a bio or part of the interview when you're talking about the individual. And then there's going to be a lot of references throughout the interview section of the paper to quotes from this interview, and a lot of references probably to the Wren and Bedian book. And so you might only have 3 or 4 references on your paper, but you do need to cite the things where you get the ideas from. I'm going to give you a bonus if you'll go and work with the University Writing Center. I'm about to send an email to Dr. Lauren DePaula, who runs the Writing Center, to share with her consultants, where I'm going to give her the instructions and the rubric for them to read over. You don't have to do this. I understand a lot of folks who are in the MBA level say, I know how to write. I don't need to go to these people, and that's fine. There's no penalty if you don't. There's some bonus if you do. And if you go to them, I'll give you 2 points on your final scoring on the paper, and I'll allow you to do that 3 times. If you want to go consult with them 3 times, that's a potential of 6 points added onto your paper. Perfect paper that you've consulted with them on for 3 times is a possible 106 on this thing. And I'll tell you more about that. You can do this through an online consult. Typically the way that works is that you make an appointment to make sure that somebody's ready for you. You email them your paper, and then it's just a chat board where you say, what do you think about this? Or give me some ideas about that. Now, they're not going to help you write it. They're not going to go through with the red pen and mark where you've got misspelled words and things. They're going to really try to look at it, especially if you only use them once, on how do you develop your ideas? How does it flow? Some of the big picture things like that, because you may have problems with flow that are much more important than misspelled words. So you've got an opportunity maybe to talk to them about how do I go about doing this interview, or how do I cite this reference. You may have an opportunity to say, here's a rough draft. Give me some ideas on how to build it a little bit better. And then you got an opportunity to give them a final draft and say, okay, now what do you think? Is it ready to turn in? 3 different times. These are not students, as I mentioned at the bottom of the instructions, who got an A in Comp 1. These are folks that Dr. DePaula thinks are some of the best of the best. They know about building papers. They're good at giving advice and feedback and things like that. Some of them may be undergraduates. In fact, they might all be undergraduates, but they're really, really good writers. So think about that. In terms of the rubric, there are a lot of different categories that I'm looking at. Some are only worth about 5 points. A couple of them are only 2 points. But there's an introduction is worth 5. The organizational overview is 10 points. The individual overview, as you see, is 15. The bulk of it is the interview itself. That's a quarter of your overall grade. And each one of these things, there's 3 little checkpoints that I'm looking for. Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? If you did all those things reasonably well, you get all of the points for that section. If you did 2 of those things pretty well, you get maybe 80% or 75% or something of the points for that section. The grammar and the spelling, 10 points total. And I'm trying to build in a little bit of flexibility. Nobody's perfect, but if you go back and you review this thing, if you run it through your spell check, you ought to catch most of this stuff. Really spend some time looking for the little red squiggly lines in Word and the green squiggly lines. That's your indication that there's the word that might be spelled wrong, or that you might rephrase this sentence somehow. Maybe there's 2 spaces in between words, something picky like that. But if you have a clean paper with very few spelling errors, if you have very few grammar errors, certainly not anything big, that's easy 10 points. Content, the purpose, and then the Writing Center. Again, the overview of this is I really want you to take all of these independent little things that you've been doing in this semester in this class, put them together to see how it works in the real world. If you're a manager, you may have already experienced some of this stuff, but getting the perspective of somebody else might help all this stuff fit together into a neat little picture. And that's what the purpose of this is. Overall, 100 points. I've tried a little bit harder lately to be a little tougher on the weekly assignments if the flow's not real good, or you're getting off topic or something, because I really want you to do well on this paper. And this has the opportunity, the potential to have a big impact on your grade. If you'll talk with the Writing Center at least once and maybe twice, share with them your draft and get them to say, all right, as you think about this instruction paper, as you think about this rubric, am I on target? If not, tell me what I can do to get on topic with what he's looking for. Chances are pretty good that you will end up writing well and you'll get some bonus points. And I really, really hope, and it's probably not going to be the case, but I really hope that everybody's going to have a very, very solid A on this thing, because I think I've set it up well. I've told you exactly what I'm looking for. If you'll just take the time to do what I've asked you to do, and you write reasonably well, you ought to do pretty well on this. Hope that answers some of the questions. Sorry that this video went longer than I had intended. That's the way I am. Everything ends up going longer when I get to talking, because I get a lot of ideas as I talk, and it carries things out a little bit. If you have questions, please email me. Please text me. My cell number is on the syllabus. Post something to the class discussion board if you think everybody would be interested in it. If I get good questions from you that I think other people would be interested in, I'll post to the class discussion board. Let's make sure that we understand this thing. You've got until, I think, April the 22nd. So as I look at the calendar today, it's March the 15th. You've got more than a month to do this. I told you coming into the spring break that it was going to be a little bit intensive in terms of what you have to do. Just scheduling time with somebody may be challenging, but you're going to have plenty of time to do it. You've got more than 4 weeks, about 5 weeks to get this thing done. And hopefully it has some value for you. It kind of wraps everything up and helps you to put it all together to be a better manager. Let me know if you have questions. Good luck.